So we've sort of built the sort of funnel from a metrics point of view. We've talked about the kind of messaging and working on that messaging. Once those two bits are done, then how do you sort of decide what sort of channels to use? I mean, there are so many channels out there these days.
It's 100% where your target customer, your ideal prospect, lives and breathes. And it's only that place. It's only that place as often as possible. In the same way that I'm a big advocate of experimenting and testing various messaging, the same thing goes for quick iterative tests in those specific channels. You know, there's a when I was at Global Testing, there was a one of the targets is very technical folks, and they don't necessarily enjoy being outbound messaged on LinkedIn or outbound messaged really at all. So you've then got to find, where do those people live? Even if you know from a previous business, you can create leads via LinkedIn, that target audience just isn't living there. They just don't live and breathe that. They live Stack Overflow or, Hacker News or, somewhere else like that. So it's that playbook thing where if you're just applying the playbook you've used before, you can probably get some leads from that, but it's not going to generate the massive sort of groundswell that you're looking for. So, but all that has to be taken into context of, can you afford to advertise in that channel? If you can, then you've got to try to drum up guerrilla tactics to sort of be involved and be able to talk to them, not surreptitiously, but, actually be a member of that community and engage and be there to help and support.
Yeah. And if you're working as a sort of smaller team then, I mean, would you suggest sort of picking a smaller number of channels and giving it more attention then, or would you sort of think about going broader to start off with?
Run your tests, run some tests in a couple of sprints, have, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2-week sprints, testing lots of different messaging and lots of different, channels. Figure out where you're getting the earliest traction possible, and then double down in that channel as much as possible. Have 3 or 4 maximum areas that you're paying attention to, including, broadly SEO, if you're doing that, paid, and then really just sort of double down into those areas and make sure that that's where you live and breathe, as much as possible, and that you're feeding that back out. And I think that's where you're going to find the best results. I mean, that's how I decide what channels to use. And until we've sort of tapped that well completely dry, then that's when you move on to another channel. Everything has its ceiling.
Yeah. And what about sort of SEO then? Because that's more of a longer play, isn't it? It's just a bit harder to perhaps experiment that you can do with, say, paid ads, for instance. How do you sort of think about that?
Yeah, I think of SEO as a very long-term gain. Some of the results that I was getting from global ad testing from SEO were 3-4 years in the making. Right away, setting out the ship and then letting the business know that it's a long-term investment, and that those things aren't going to pay off for 12 to 18 months potentially, because many companies will want to do SEO in quotation marks, I suppose, will want to do SEO. And then 6 months in, was like, oh, well, where's the results? Well, that's not working, and it's like, well, actually, if you dig a little deeper, you weren't listed anywhere for this key phrase 6 months ago, and now you're on page 2. Yeah, nobody clicks on page 2. Nobody cares at all. But that's actually a pretty massive achievement. Eventually, as long as it's going in the right direction, you'll get to page 1 if you keep that investment going. But if you don't, then you've just stopped short of the finish line. You've run the marathon, and you're 8 miles in and say, it's good enough. And you could have pushed through and got a little further. You would have started to see the results that you needed to sort of push you along.
Yeah, you definitely need a bit of patience.